So you're at the gun shop and you see these three beauties. Well, you can only take one home, and there's only one way to settle that. In this video, we do ourselves a good old-fashioned shootout. Welcome to the Gentleman Gunner. If you are new to my channel, this is the channel for the gentleman who hates money and loves to shoot. Typically when I like to do a series of reviews, I get to a point where I do a shootout between the guns I've tested. The variables I consider when we're going to do a shootout is that the guns are about identical in performance, price, and size. And if you are looking for additional detail on these guns, I have individual reviews and I will leave the link in the description to all three below. Now before we go further, I have a brief message from my YouTube manual reviewer. All three of these guns here are in their factory configuration. I have not modified, nor have they been modified in any shape, way, or manner. This is just a good old genuine review between these three. Now let's get into our contestants. Now our first contestant has a base price of $949, a competitive weight of 31 ounces, and a mag capacity of 18 rounds. What it's definitely known for is its incredible trigger, coming in at a pull of around 3.5 pounds. Hailing from Turkey with the inspiration of Taran Butler himself, I give to you the TTI Combat. And our next contestant comes in at a base price of $999, largely famed for its incredible ergonomics and now metal frame, with a competitive weight of 30 ounces, a mag capacity of 17, and a trigger pull of 4 pounds. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Smith & Wesson M&P Metal Carry Comp. And our final contender at a base price of $1,099 and a competitive weight coming at a featherweight of 25 ounces, mag capacity of 17, and a trigger pull of 5 pounds. But it is an awesome local yokel. I give you, ladies and gentlemen, the Shadow Systems XR920P. Now that we've just got a brief overview of all three guns, I actually love doing these tests because my opinion can change when I have all three right in front of me at the range. So I did take a different approach and eliminated 2 of the tests, and more so did a shooting impressions as well as tested a variety of different ammo, because that is going to be the scenario that you are most likely going to encounter, because you may have the opportunity to see all three of these guns in the same setting and shoot them back to back. Now to start this off, I did put 3 different types of ammo through each of these guns and shot them differently just to see how they would react. I ended up using Blazer 115 aluminum, which you know I will use for all the testing. I went with Federal 124, which is a fairly hot round for a 124 factory round. In addition to that, I went with the SIG M117 Plus P ammo, so a pure defensive ammo that we can actually relate, because that might be the way we may use these guns. And largely what I'm going to be paying attention to is recoil impulse as well as the return to zero, because that's about what you will get in that experience. The first gun I actually put my hands on was the M&P Metal Carry Comp, because it is arguably probably the best looking of the 3 on here. After I tested all 3 guns, one thing I noticed that stuck out was that the felt recoil was the most out of the 3 presented here. That has largely to do with the metal frame. Now, in the past, if you've seen on my channel, a lot of the metal frame guns seem to be the softest shooting guns. Well, here's the thing. Part of that equation is having additional weight, because the more weight you have on the gun, the more vibration it can soak up in recoil. This is where Smith & Wesson gets a lot of criticism for this gun, because it really doesn't do that. I will elaborate how that translates in the shooting experience and as well as the results, because that is interesting. Now, the one thing I want to point out is my sight tracking. Well, this was arguably the wildest, and it was also the one I had to work the hardest to get to track up and down. Now, why is that? Well, I'd have to attribute to it being number one, lighter, two, the fact that you have more of a central port design for this compensator or port. Now, what does that mean? Well, when you have a smaller hole, you have a lot more pressure going out, which in turn forces this down a little harder. Now, how you counteract that in the past is somewhere in the spring adjustment, and I think this is just a touch too heavy for the springing and this design. Now, is it a deterrent in terms of performance? No, but it does make finding the limit of the gun a little harder, and it's something you would have to work harder at. And one final point on this gun is it did have reliability issues because I did in fact lend this exact gun to David at the Humble Marksman channel. Now, if you watch my initial review, I didn't have issues with it. But if you watch when I'm looking at the trigger of it, if I pin the trigger back on it, it would keep the slide open. Now, the reset on this is something that caught my attention because for whatever reason, if you hold the trigger down and pull it all the way back, it goes to slide lock. That's worth talking about because he found that issue and then I confirmed that issue when I shot this in a match and I shot it strong hand only. It did in fact go bull to action on me. So what is going on? Well, essentially the slide release spring is actually getting hung up on the trigger shoe. And I actually bought an old M&P just to take a look at the design because I know this is their performance trigger. What's interesting is that there's a larger channel on the top side of the trigger shoe to allow room for that spring to move, whereas this is just a little tighter. So what I did in the interim was that I did kind of take my screwdriver and just pried it a little bit more so that way it wouldn't be so pronounced. I did validate that in the shooting impressions with strong hand only, so that is worth taking note. Now, will I send it in for warranty work? I'm not too sure since it's working now, but I will follow that up in my 1,000-round review of this. Now, the next gun I grabbed was the TTI Combat. I like this gun. I'm partial to Canics largely because of the value they present, and they take the Walther trigger. If you know anything about my background, I shot competitively with a Walther Q5 steel frame for about 50,000 rounds. So I'm just a touch biased towards the trigger design of this, and that does translate into this gun. If you are a person looking for a gun with not a lot of muzzle rise, this is going to be one that catches your attention because it does have the most muzzle rise of the three. Large part of that is because the height over bore axis just tends to be a little bit higher on this particular gun. So what does that mean in the shooting experience? Well, you will see the dot exaggerate a touch more in recoil, but that's not a bad thing because I will say this is one thing Canic and Terran thought about when they designed this is that this gun's return to zero is what sells it for me. Every time I shot this gun, I could visibly see the sight returning, especially on long shots where I could be a little bit more patient and I could squeeze off solid hits. Now the XR920P was the one that continues to surprise me, and the thing that really stuck out to me is the recoil impulse on this particular gun is very soft. The funny thing was I actually went and put plus P124 through it, and usually you can feel that difference.
Yeah, I really like plus P through this gun. This gun is really engineered to shoot defensive ammo well. If anything, I feel that the recoil impulse is actually softer when you shoot it with the M117 there.
For whatever reason, the hotter the ammo, the better it felt to shoot. And as a result of the three that we have here, it definitely is the most pleasant to shoot. And the return to zero is interesting as I had put a Siley Ghost, which is basically an SRO footprint with this really thick shrouding, and thank you Siley for providing this optic. It was funny to watch the return on this because number one, the gun's not really rising high largely because of the low bore axe design inherent with the Glock design. Secondly, you have this comp working very, very well. So what it looks like is it's literally a dot appearing. And it took me a second to get used to that, but every time I saw the dot more so appear rather than track up and down, it was easy just to lay out quick, accurate shots with this. And that is one thing that stuck out to me over these three already. Now, as far as reliability, prior to this video, I had shot about 500 to 600 rounds for it and haven't had any issues with it. So when I went to do the ammo tests, and this is why it's important to not only test different ammo and also test it strong hand, is to see what will happen. Oddly enough, the Federal Run 24 Ended up having 2 failure feeds with this.
Yep, I don't know what that is, but that's the second malfunction I've had shooting strong hand, and I could say that I'm not limp wristing it, although it's single-handed, but it seems to not like the Federal 124 for whatever reason. So it's just fix that again. Okay, it's loaded. Yep, I mean, it ejected it. So let's shoot this. This time I'll do it with both hands, so we're not seeing that maybe as an issue.
Now, what that is typically an indicator of is that this particular gun and its spring tuning is about at its limit with that ammo. So that's something to note if you do decide to go that route. Now we have all 3 contestants kind of with their first shooting impressions. But this is why I like to do data, and so now we're going to dive right into the 25-yard build drill and the transition drill. Now, before I do that, I asked if you like this video, please hit that like button as that helps me a lot. And you are going to want to subscribe because I'm always coming out with new content. And if you like to upgrade your gun, I constantly come out with other content such as Good to Great, where I take ordinary guns and transform them into real fire breathers. So you're going to want to subscribe. Now, if you've seen the reviews on all 3 of these guns, I did do a doubles drill and a 15-yard precision accuracy drill. There's not going to be much change from what I did in those videos to here to make this a worthwhile discussion, so I only focused on the 25-yard build drill as well as a transition drill. So you're probably thinking, well, why don't we just go look at the old data and just make our conclusions? Well, here's the thing. I did 2 out of 3 of these guns with their iron sights because I like to do reviews with guns out of the box. So the thing is, results can change, especially on these fire drills when I slap a red dot on them and can tell me different information. So I'm going to expand on that and you'll see how. Now, in the prior video, I ran this gun, the TTI Combat, as you see fit. And by the way, this is David over at the Humble Marksman channel. This is his gun, so he lent me this for this review. So I've just kept it the way he gave it to me. And for this video, there wasn't actually a change that I did to the gun. I even ran the same ammo. But the conclusion I drew in that last video is I felt I could extrapolate more performance out of this gun, and I did. What I ended up doing was engaging the grip a touch harder. Now, while my accuracy didn't really have a appreciable difference, I did gain speed. So on both the 25-yard build drill and transition drill, my hit factor actually jumped up just a touch on that. I didn't expect a big change, but that just confirmed that I could get a little more aggressive with this gun.
That has the best dot tracking for sure.
So the next gun, which is the M&P Metal Carry Comp, I ended up slapping a Vortex Defender XL on it. And that's one thing I like about the M&Ps is that they give you so many different optic plates and options. It did have a significant impact, especially on the 25-yard build drill with this gun. Largely because I was able to call shots a lot easier. I had to do 2 things different than I did with the Canic. Number 1, I had to be a touch more patient because of the way the dot returned. It was a little bit wilder and a touch more aggressive. And secondly, engage my support hand a little bit more than I think. Because the first couple of runs on both drills, I was actually slower than when I ran it with irons. And as I'd rolled through it, I said, you know what, there's no way I am this much slower. So what I ended up doing was gripping the gun even harder than I thought, and the hits actually showed up even better. In fact, I actually did one build drill where I nailed all 6 rounds in the IDPA down 0 zone, which is an 8-inch circle. Now, I mentioned I wanted to touch on the recoil impulse. Typically, it doesn't bother me, but what it can do, and it did for me on this test, is it gave me a sensation that I was at the limit of the gun. And it turned out not to be true. So the thing I would say to you is if you're considering this gun is don't be afraid to engage it, meaning a harder grip and more wrist tension to really get the performance out of this gun. Finding the limits of this particular gun of the 3 here is definitely the challenge that you will have with this gun, but it does reward aggression. Moving on to the shadow systems. And for the 25-yard build drill, I did make improvements with it, especially as I went along, but it wasn't quite the market improvement I was hoping to have. Now, the transition drill is where the shadow systems absolutely destroyed the other 2, because Having a little bit less weight to swing around from target to target, as well as a very engaging shooting experience, really produced solid results. The more I pushed it, the better the gun did. And I kid you not, I couldn't believe it how tight these groups were. Now that has to do more with how well the gun settles, and because this gun's return to zero is so quick with minimal rise to it, I was able to squeeze off solid shots at speed with this gun. And for me, I would be happy to compete with this gun in competition as is. Now look, I get it. Number one, it's going to be based on my shooting skill and your shooting skill to determine if it makes sense for you. But I want this data to make sense to you guys. From a data perspective, and what I like to lean on is, what does the data tell us about how awesome these guns are? With the Shadow systems, the test proves that the practical performance is there. And that was really expressed in its results on the transition drill when I produced the hit factor score I did. And I absolutely love a gun that rewards assertiveness. And while I'd mentioned that on the Metal Carry Comp, the more aggressive you got with your grip on it, the better it did. The difference between being intentfully aggressive and being assertive, I still have control of what I'm doing, where aggressive, I am overly engaging things I don't think I should. It's definitely a step in the right direction compared to where Shadow systems used to be. I thought it was interesting that it had the malfunction it had, but you know, all things considered, the gun has been pretty solid. And as I recall on the video for this gun, a lot of you challenged the value proposition at $1,100 for this gun. Well, here's the thing. There's what we all think, and then there's what the market thinks. And when I had bought this gun originally, if you recall, I paid $960 for it, plus all the fees. So the market says not quite $1,100, or at least the gun retailers out there are selling them for less. Talking about the Metal Carry Comp, of the three, it is absolutely the best looking gun of the bunch. I mean, owning this gun, there is a sense of pride of ownership when you show your friends you have this, and yes, it does impress. And what I've come to love about M&P specifically is their modularity in adjusting the grips the way you like. So the ergonomics to me are absolutely killer. And you also get their new performance trigger, which is a nice thing when you're looking to say, you know what, I just want the gun to go right out of the box. And at $1,000, this is a very, very complete package. And that's something I appreciate about Smith & Wesson when they put a gun together, is that they give you a full experience. Now, the shooting experience is different. When I shot this gun originally, I shot it by itself that day. And being caught up in both how beautiful it is and ideal ergonomics, I don't recall this gun being very hard to shoot. And I will say, I don't think it's a hard gun to shoot, generally speaking. But I recall having challenges with trying to shoot at distance with this gun. And now that I can call that a lot better with the dot on it, had everything to do with how I was engaging the gun. So you're gonna have to really think about how you engage this gun. That's more of a shooter thing, and it's a very trainable thing at that. So I don't know if I would mark that as a con so much as you as the end user think about that when you are considering this gun. And the one thing is the reliability. Now this is just an issue unique to this gun. And for that, guys, it's tough, because when I look at it from a design perspective or a QC perspective, I'm kind of leaning that it's almost borderline a design issue. Now, you can in fact challenge me on that thought, because why would Smith & Wesson release this gun? Guys, I couldn't tell you, but if you had actually looked and saw this and said, why is that slide release so close to the trigger, and why in the world is the spring just right above it? You can see by design it's meant for that, because there is a relief channel on that on the trigger shoe. Now, by the way, if you're wondering how I didn't have a problem with this, what David was kind enough to point out was that he looked at the way I like to grip a gun, which is I'm very high up on the gun. And here's the thing, where does my support palm land? It's right there on the slide release. So essentially what's happening, because there's not enough pressure to force this up to create a slide lock condition like you would when it goes empty and the follower pushes it up with way more tension. So I'm not too sure what to say about that regarding the reliability. I think, you know, all those aside, I think it's a good value at $1,000 considering these three here. Now finally, I want to talk about the TTI Combat. I did in the prior video kind of criticize the fact that I felt there was a marketing dollar and fee attached to this gun, but what I will say for this video, among these three, it was by far the easiest to shoot well. Now, I don't want to confuse that with, is it the easiest gun to shoot? No. If you have these skills, the fundamentals to take advantage of this awesome trigger and of course how this gun functions, you will see that shooting this gun well comes a lot easier on this. And that has everything to do with not only the trigger itself, but the fact how this gun returns to zero is consistent and easy to spot. From an ask standpoint, when you put these two guns in the equation, the $949 ask price starts to seem a little bit more attractive, especially when we start to consider how easy this gun is to shoot well. Funny thing is, this is why we have a thing called what are people actually buying these things for. Today, as of this video, I actually see these things going for about $8.99, and they are in stock and readily available. Now, one thing I just want to briefly touch on is Canic reliability. These seem to be hit and miss. I do have a friend locally that has one of these. He likes to shoot in IDPA, and he's had some issues to the point where he's now on his second time back to Century Arms. So something to pay attention to. Now that's his case. That's kind of the thing with the value proposition guns, is that sometimes that's where they may make it up, is there may be something somewhere in there that may come out down the road. Pay attention to this gun for that reason. Now, I have an idea of which gun I would take home of the three sitting on this table. But here's the thing, this video is not about me and what I think. I make this information for you guys and I want to hear about it. So, which gun would you take home, and tell me why? Don't just make a soft factor, tell me why you would take this gun home. Now, if you do want to see the data that I use for not only this test, but see how these guns performed against other guns I've had on this channel, I will leave a link for the evaluation results in the description and you can check that out. And that's what I have for you guys today. Now, remember this, do not buy the gun you love shooting, buy the gun that makes you love shooting. And until then, guys, we will see you all at the range.